I thought I was just running late to my daughter's graduation ceremony. I had my blue dress ironed the night before, her favorite white roses wrapped in cellophane on the passenger seat, and 23 years of love pressed tight inside my chest. And then my son-in-law stepped in front of me at the auditorium entrance and said, with a smile so thin it looked like a paper cut, "There's no ticket for you." He said it casually, the way you tell someone the parking lot is full. 300 people streamed past us on the wide stone steps of Hargrove University's Whitmore Hall, mortarboard hats bobbing in the May sunshine, and I stood frozen with roses in my arms and my daughter's name, Emma Caldwell, Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry. Printed right there on the program a stranger had pressed into my hand at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at that program. Then he looked at me. And he waited, with the patience of someone who had prepared for this exact moment and was entirely comfortable in it. It took me 4 full seconds to understand that he meant it. 4 seconds where my brain cycled through every rational explanation before the cold, smooth truth settled over me like floodwater. This was not a mistake. He had planned for me not to be there. And when I drove home 40 minutes later, in a silence so thick I could barely breathe, stepped through my front door and sat down at my kitchen table, still in my blue dress, with the cellophane roses still in my hand, I found an envelope on the table that had not been there when I left. And inside, it was the beginning of the end of everything I had believed about my daughter and me. My name is Catherine Moore. I am 54 years old. I live in a pale yellow house on Orchard Lane in Ohio, the kind of town where people wave from driveways, and the diner on 5th Street has served the same blueberry pie recipe since 1987. I moved into that house when Emma was 6 weeks old, and her father David was already showing signs of becoming the kind of man who replaces his family the way other people replace furniture. First the wife, then the children, then his entire previous life, piece by piece, until nothing recognizable remains. I planted the hydrangeas along the front walk myself in the second summer after the divorce, kneeling in the mud on a Saturday morning with baby Emma asleep in a bouncy chair on the porch behind me, the soil dark and cool between my fingers, and I felt something that surprised me. Not despair, but a quiet, stubborn certainty. This was going to be ours. I painted the kitchen soft yellow because Emma, at 3 years old, held up a crayon and told me with absolute authority that yellow was the happiest color. I have made every mortgage payment on that house for 22 years, never once late, tracked in a blue notebook in the kitchen drawer. I raised Emma alone, steadily, without drama, the way you cross a very long bridge by not looking at the water. We were close in the way that becomes structural, part of how you understand yourself. She called me on Tuesday afternoons for no reason at all. We had a shorthand language built over years of shared references and knowing looks, and I knew her well enough to tell the difference between her tired voice and her sad voice and her careful voice, the one she used when she was managing the distance between what she felt and what she said. I knew she pressed her thumbnail into her palm when she was nervous, that she ate cereal when she was sad, that she went quiet before she was ready to say anything that truly mattered. I knew her. I believed, with the certainty of something earned over 22 years of careful daily love, that nothing could touch what we had built. Then she met Daniel Mercer, and the bridge began to sway. She brought him home for Thanksgiving 3 years ago. He was 31, sandy-haired, with a law degree he managed to mention within the first 10 minutes, and a handshake that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. He was polite in a way that felt less like warmth and more like precision. every gesture calibrated, every compliment arriving slightly too quickly to be entirely natural. He asked me thoughtful questions about my work and listened with an expression of focused attention that I now understand was a performance of interest, not the thing itself. Emma watched him all evening with that particular radiance that belongs only to new love, and I told myself my faint, nameless unease was just the ordinary grief of watching your child turn toward someone else. They were married the following June in a courthouse ceremony Emma described as practical. I had 3 days' notice, wore a pale green dress I bought that week, played no role in the planning. Daniel grilled steaks at their apartment that evening and told me I was officially part of his family now, and I chose to trust that warmth deliberately. The way you step onto ice you're not entirely certain will hold, because the alternative is standing on the bank alone. The first real alarm came in February, 7 months after the wedding. Emma called on a Thursday evening. Unusual, she always texted first, and her voice carried that quality I recognized from her adolescence, the slightly flattened tone of a conversation rehearsed in advance. She said she and Daniel were considering some financial restructuring. She used that phrase, financial restructuring, as if it were her own, but it sat oddly in her mouth. Borrowed language. I asked what she meant specifically. She said they were thinking about assets, about planning more intentionally for the future. I asked what assets. She laughed lightly and said, "Just planning ahead. Mom, nothing dramatic." She hung up within minutes. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time afterward. The house was very quiet. The February wind moved through the bare hydrangea branches outside the kitchen window, and I could hear them tapping against the glass, dry and persistent and unanswered. I told myself, she is 26 years old and newly married and thinking about her future. This is normal. I told myself this several times, and it was almost convincing. The second alarm was sharper and could not be reasoned away as easily. Daniel called me directly on a Sunday morning in early March, something he had never once done in 3 years. I was on the back steps with my coffee, watching the neighbor's dog methodically dig up the same corner of his own yard, when my phone lit up with Daniel's name. His voice was warm in that particular way that keeps you just far enough away to miss what's behind it. He asked how I was, and then he asked about the house. How old was the roof? Had I had the foundation inspected recently? Had I ever seriously considered downsizing now that Emma was grown and it was just me in a 3-bedroom house? I told him the roof was 8 years old and in good condition, and I had no plans to move. He said, of course, just asking. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that conversational almost afterthought that is never actually an afterthought, that he had a colleague who specialized in real estate law and estate planning, excellent reputation, and that if I ever wanted a consultation, he would be happy to arrange it. I thanked him pleasantly. After I hung up, I poured the rest of my coffee into the garden bed, stood on the back steps in the cold morning air holding the empty mug, and let myself feel, fully, the thing I had been pushing to the edges of my attention for weeks, a slow, cold certainty, precise as a blade, that I was being surveyed, that someone was cataloging my house, my assets, my plans, that the questions were not curiosity. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself patiently, like a recitation, Daniel is a lawyer. Lawyers categorize everything. It means nothing. Emma chose him, and Emma has good judgment. I am being the kind of mother who can't let go gracefully. I repeated these things until they were almost convincing, and then put on my coat and drove to the grocery store and bought nothing I had intended to buy because I couldn't concentrate, and came home and sat in the driveway for several minutes before going inside. In April, I drove to their apartment with 2 jars of jam and a cardigan of Emma's that had been at my house since Christmas. Daniel answered. Emma was on a study call in the back room and would be a while. He made tea, and we sat at the kitchen table while the afternoon light came in low and golden through the window. The apartment had that particular cleanliness that appears when someone has prepared for the arrival of a specific person. Not lived in, but staged, every surface just slightly too clear. While Daniel was at the counter, I noticed a navy blue folder sitting beside the fruit bowl, thick, with a white adhesive label on the front that I couldn't read from where I sat. When he came to the table with the cups, he moved the folder into the kitchen drawer in one smooth, unhurried motion. No hesitation, no glance at it. The practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed precisely this. The drawer clicked shut. I wrapped both hands around my teacup and said nothing and noticed everything. Emma came out 20 minutes later, reading glasses pushed into her hair, and was warm and present and briefly, entirely herself. The Emma I knew. She held my hand when she walked me to the door, and for just a moment something moved in her eyes, something that hovered between a warning and a question, her mouth opening slightly as if a sentence was forming that she had decided not to say. Then Daniel appeared in the hallway behind her, his hand settling at the small of her back, and she closed her mouth and said gently, "Drive safe, Mom." I drove home. I thought about the navy folder all the way down Orchard Lane, and I thought, if that concerns me, and the oldest, most animal part of me, the part that had navigated 22 years alone, said that it did, then I have a right to know what it says. The graduation was on the 12th of May. Emma called 2 weeks before to give me the time and the building. She did not mention tickets. I did not think to ask. I assumed, the way you assume oxygen will be present when you open a door, that there would be a seat for me. Because she was my daughter. Because I was the only parent she had. Because I had been there for every single thing. I had the white roses from the florist on cedar. I had the card I had rewritten 4 times. I had the blue dress. I drove to Whitmore Hall on the morning of the 12th, found parking 2 blocks away, walked up the wide stone steps in the warm May sunshine with the cellophane crackling softly in my arms, and found Daniel at the top of the stairs with his hands in his jacket pockets and that smile, and he said it. "There's no ticket for you." I asked him to repeat himself. He did. Limited seats. Emma had prioritized their close friends. He was sorry I hadn't been informed sooner. He did not look sorry. His voice was even, professional. The voice of a man completing an unpleasant task with rehearsed composure. I said I needed to speak with Emma. He said she was seated and it would be disruptive. People flowed around us. The sun was warm and entirely surreal. I walked back down the stairs. I drove home. I unlocked my front door and stepped into my yellow kitchen, and I saw it immediately. A white envelope on the table. Business-sized. My name in Emma's handwriting on the front. I had not left it there. Someone had been in my house while I was gone. My hands did not shake when I picked it up. They were cold and steady, the way hands get when a body has moved past shock and into something quieter and more dangerous. I opened it, pulled out the single page inside, read it once, carefully, read it again. And then I sat down slowly in my kitchen chair while the refrigerator hummed and the hydrangeas shifted in the May wind outside the window, and I understood completely, finally, with a clarity that felt like a door swinging open onto a room I had always, on some level, known was there. What had been built against me, and by whom, and for how long? The letter was one page, single-spaced, printed in a neutral, lawyerly sans serif that was not Emma's font. Emma used Garamond for everything, had since college. The language was careful in the same way. Not Emma's language, not the language of a daughter who called on Tuesday afternoons for no reason, who once texted me, "I've been thinking about the smell of your kitchen, and I miss it." This language was managed, drained of warmth. It said, in essence, that Catherine Moore was aging and living alone in a house with considerable equity, that maintaining such a property carried increasing financial risk, that Emma and Daniel were prepared to assist with a transition to a more appropriate living arrangement, and that they had already consulted with a real estate attorney regarding the most advantageous means by which the property at 14 Orchard Lane could be liquidated, with proceeds distributed in a manner that would benefit the whole family going forward. It used the phrase whole family 3 times. It said near the end that they hoped I would understand this came from a place of love and concern. I read it twice. Then a third time, slowly, with the attention you give to something when your brain keeps sliding off the meaning because it cannot integrate what the words imply. My house. The pale yellow house on Orchard Lane, paid for over 22 years. The house with the hydrangeas I had planted in the mud with infant Emma asleep on the porch. The kitchen painted yellow because yellow was the happiest color. They wanted me to sell it, to liquidate it in their language, and distribute the proceeds to the whole family, which was a phrase that meant Daniel. A real estate attorney had already been consulted. The colleague Daniel had offered to introduce me to as an afterthought. The man with the excellent reputation had not been a courtesy. He had been a staging post in a plan that had been running since before I noticed the warning signs, and probably since before the wedding. I put the letter flat on the table. I pressed my hands on either side of it. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on Orchard Lane. I was aware of my own breathing, steady, slower than I expected, and I thought, they did this today on purpose. They sent me to that auditorium knowing there was no seat for me because they needed me out of the house. Someone had come here with Emma's key and left this letter on my table like a notice of eviction from my own life. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen window and looked at the hydrangeas going blue in the afternoon light. What I felt was not tears, not vertigo, not the floor dissolving. What I felt was colder and more useful than grief. I felt the specific, focused anger of a woman who has worked a very long time and has just discovered that someone has been quietly, systematically trying to take what she built. Not the hot kind, the kind that makes a plan. I called my friend Janet. She had been my closest friend for 18 years. A retired paralegal with a mind like a steel trap, an absolute intolerance for nonsense, dressed up as good intentions. I told her everything, my voice steady and quiet in a way that surprised me. She was silent the entire time I spoke, and when I finished, she said, "Catherine, do not call Emma. Do not call Daniel. Do not respond to that letter in any form. Tomorrow morning at 9, you call Marcus Webb." Marcus was a real estate and family law attorney she had worked alongside for years. "Tonight," she said, "you photograph that letter in the envelope and you write down every conversation you have had with Daniel in the past 6 months, every question about the house, every phone call, every visit, with dates. Do it now while it's fresh." I said I would. She said, "And change your locks tonight." I paused. "They used Emma's key, Janet." A beat of silence. "I know," she said quietly. "Change them anyway." I photographed everything. I filled 4 pages of the blue notebook from the kitchen drawer, the same notebook where I had tracked 22 years of mortgage payments, with every conversation I could reconstruct, dated as accurately as possible, the February phone call with the borrowed language, Daniel's Sunday morning questions about the roof and the foundation. The navy folder moved smoothly into the drawer in April, Emma's mouth opening at the door, the sentence she hadn't said. I wrote it all down, steady and precise, while the light outside shifted to evening and the hydrangeas went dark in the dusk. Then I called a locksmith. Marcus Webb saw me the next morning at 9. His office smelled of old paper and coffee, with the calm of a place where difficult problems are routinely solved. He read the letter twice and said, "This is a pressure document. No legal teeth whatsoever, but designed to feel like it has some. He's testing your response." He asked if I had ever signed any document giving Emma or Daniel power of attorney or any interest in the property. I had not. He asked if my will was current. It was. Emma was my sole heir. He said, "Update it this week and send me your deed, your mortgage payoff confirmation, and every account statement you have. I want everything locked before he makes his next move." He said, "Because he will." He was right. 4 days later, a man named Colin Hart called me, Daniel's colleague, and introduced himself as someone who understood I was considering my options regarding the property on Orchard Lane. He spoke smoothly, with the confidence of someone accustomed to closing things. I let him speak for 45 seconds. Then I said very calmly, "Mr. Hart, I have retained legal counsel. All further communication should be directed to Marcus Webb. I'll send you his contact details." A pause. Of course, my apologies for the directness. He hung up. I called Marcus from the grocery store parking lot. He said, "Good, exactly right." Then, with a different quality in his voice, "Catherine, I looked into Daniel Mercer this morning. There is something you need to know." He had been married before. 2 years, ending in divorce 3 years before he met Emma. His ex-wife was named Lauren, and she had also owned property. Marcus had spoken to the attorney who represented Lauren in that divorce, and the picture was not unfamiliar. The gradual pressure, the financial consultations framed as concern, the language of family and practicality deployed to mask a systematic extraction. Lauren had signed a document early in the relationship that had cost her considerably. She had not pressed charges. She had wanted it over. "He has done this before," Marcus said. "He is not improvising. He is executing a pattern." I sat in my car in the parking lot and thought about my daughter, who was 26 and brilliant and had her father's trusting streak. She doesn't know about Lauren, I thought. And then, I need to tell her, not to save my house. My house was already safe. To save Emma. I asked Janet to come with me. We went to the apartment on a Saturday afternoon unannounced because I understood now what announced visits produced. Emma answered the door, and the expression on her face, in the half-second before she composed it, was relief and guilt and desperate hope folded together. She said, "Mom." Just that, one word, carrying 3 different things. I said, "Can I come in?" She stepped back. Daniel was in the living room. He rose when we entered, his face settling into professional warmth. And then he saw Janet, and something in his expression recalibrated. Just slightly. He said, "Catherine, I wasn't expecting you." I said, "I know." I sat on the couch without being invited to, put my hands on my knees, and looked at him. I want to talk about the letter. He sat down across from me, very composed. Emma sat at the edge of the armchair between us, her thumbnail pressing into her palm. Daniel said with great reasonableness that they only wanted what was best for me, that the equity in the house wasn't serving anyone, that he had simply been trying to help. I said, "I know what you were trying to do." A pause. The warmth adjusted. He said, "I understand you've retained an attorney. Entirely you're right." I said, "His colleague spoke to Lauren's attorney." The room went very quiet. Emma made a small sound. Daniel's face did not change. He was too practiced for that. But something behind his eyes went absolutely still. Emma said quietly, "Who is Lauren?" I told her. Everything Marcus had told me. The previous marriage, the property, the pattern, the document Lauren had signed. I spoke quietly, without drama, watching my daughter's face while I did it. I watched her follow each piece to its next implication, with the same methodical mind she applied to her research. Daniel said twice that this was entirely false, that Lauren had been unstable, that I was being manipulated by an attorney with a financial motive. He said it smoothly and calmly. Emma watched him say it, and I could see the exact moment, not dramatic, not explosive, just a small internal shift, like a key turning in a lock, when she stopped believing him. She said, "Daniel, did you arrange for Colin Hart to call my mother?" He said, "That was an introduction, Emma, a courtesy." She said, "Did you have him call her?" He did not answer. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm one last time, then released it deliberately, like setting down something heavy she had carried too long. She said very quietly, "I need you to leave." He left. Not quietly. A door, a raised voice, tires on the street. But he left. Emma and I sat in the apartment in the enormous silence that followed, and she put her face in her hands and wept the way of someone who's been holding on for a very long time. I put my arm around her and said nothing, because nothing needed saying yet. Finally, she said, muffled, "I knew something was wrong. He said you'd be taken care of, that it was practical, that you'd understand. I told myself he was right." I said, "I know." She said, "The ticket. He said it was the seating limit, that I could celebrate with you after." I believed him. A long pause. "I shouldn't have." I said, "No, you shouldn't have." She knew it wasn't unkind, and she knew it was true. She squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. The divorce proceedings began 6 weeks later. Marcus's colleague provided a sworn affidavit detailing the pattern from the previous marriage. Daniel's attempt to assert that the couple's moral support and financial guidance constituted an equitable interest in my estate, which Marcus described as the most creative nonsense he had encountered in 15 years of practice, was dismissed without ceremony. Emma moved out of the apartment while Daniel was at work on a Tuesday with Janet and me and a rented van. She spent 3 weeks on my couch while she found a sublet near the university. She started therapy in July. She ate a great deal of cereal in those first weeks, and I made it without comment because I have always known what the cereal means. The following December, the university held a commencement ceremony for doctoral candidates, and I sat in the front row with a white rose across my knees. I watched Emma walk across the stage and accept her degree with both hands, the way she had always received things she had earned. She looked out from the stage and found me immediately. She always knew exactly where I was. and smiled with her whole face, not the careful smile I had watched her wear for the past year, but the real one, the one I had known since she was 3 years old. Afterward, she pressed her forehead to mine, eyes closed, the way she had as a small child, and said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I said, "I know, it's done." By spring, I had repainted the back porch. Not yellow. I chose a soft gray-green this time, the color of hydrangea leaves. Emma came over on a Saturday in April, and we planted a new row of hydrangeas along the back fence together, kneeling in the same dark, cool soil I had knelt in alone 25 years before. She is not the same Emma who brought Daniel home for Thanksgiving and watched him with the radiance of new love. But she is still Emma, still the person who pressed her thumbnail into her palm when she was nervous and ate cereal, when she was sad, and knew how to go quiet before saying the things that truly mattered. She is also, now, someone who recognizes borrowed language when it appears in her own mouth. That is not a small thing. The blue notebook is still in the kitchen drawer. I started a new section in it. Not mortgage payments this time, but a short list of things I have been carrying that I can now put down. What I kept is what matters. This house, this kitchen, the hydrangeas going blue every May along the fence. I lost a version of trust I cannot entirely recover. I lost the easy certainty that love is enough protection against the people it lets in. But I kept the house, and I kept Emma, and I kept the knowledge, deep and practical and completely unglamorous, of how to stand alone in a room and begin again. That knowledge is the most expensive thing I own. I didn't let this take it from me. I didn't let this take anything else.